Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian. The 5G era looms ever closer. In the rapid development stage of 5G, Beijing hosts the 5G World Convention, which harnesses the latest trends of industrial transformation. With the theme of 5G, change the world, create the future, what are the challenges that determine the extent of 5G's global reach? Before our discussion, take a look at all of this new development.
5G technology has entered our lives with features like ultra-high speed and multiple connections. In China, its commercialization at the end of October has brought more attention and discussions, like at the first World 5G Convention in Beijing.
The convention aims to build a platform to promote exchanges, demonstration, and cooperation in 5G technology and benefit the entire world.
And more applications are on the way to foster a new way of life.
For example, there's smart mining, factory, and medical treatment. We've had relatively good solutions for these applications based on 5G technology and provided relevant services to these vertical industries.
And deeper integration is being made among 5G and other technologies and industries.
For example, in healthcare, we're seeing telemedicine, remote 5G robotic surgery, and use of holograms to visit elderly, distant, and housebound patients. 5G is also transforming manufacturing and transportation.
Many companies have found opportunities.
When 5G is combined with artificial intelligence, great efficiency improvement is seen in the retail industry. This includes a completely intelligent supply chain and smarter consumption experience.
And there are still many challenges. The biggest concern is the security issues caused by big data flow due to 5G's broadband and ultra-high speed. Therefore, there are suggestions.
The security system for the 5G era should be called a membrane, which will filter 5 things, namely the network, identity, applications, big data, and behaviors.
And after the commercialization of 5G, more attention will be paid to this area and the regulations of more applications, according to experts.
Who's surfing the next wave of World 5G Convention? Who's surfing the next wave of 5G innovations? Let's loop in our panelists from different parts of the world. In Boston, we have Roger Antener, who is the founder and lead analyst of Reckon Analytics. In Washington, D.C., we are joined by Ernest McDuffie, the founder of the Global McDuffie Group. Last but not least, in our Beijing studio, Gaike Ke, an associate professor from the School of Computer Science and Technology from China Institute of Technology. And I want to welcome the three of you. Mr. Gai, starting from you, commercial use of 5G networks is already available to mobile users here in China. But how good is the service so far? Mr. Gai, very briefly from you.
Well, for the deployment, we all know there are 2 steps. The first one is to have infrastructure. The next step is to have app ecosystem. For the first step, I do think we will finish this step very soon. We know the Chinese IT companies and the major service providers are trying to build up full function 5G network throughout the country. So I think this step may take around like 1 or 2 years. But for the next step, it may take a longer time because building up an ecosystem requires around 3 or 5 years or even more.
3 or 5 years. First stage, 1 or 2 years. So Mr. Antener, agree with that? What does that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, what we need is, yes, it will take several years for 5G to really become on its own. We have to look at wireless networks as a foundation on which innovation will happen. And that takes several years. We need first to have networks to tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. And then the innovation will come. And the 5G that we have right now it's baby steps. There are still several innovations under the 5G standard coming that are absolutely critical to make a big difference when we look at 5G. Right now, 5G is a little bit faster than 4G, but that's about it. And that's not really what 5G is about.
Right. It's much more than just the speed itself. Now, baby step, Mr. McDuffie. How big is the baby step now? Is everybody making the baby step now?
I think there are baby steps being made, and I don't think they're that big. Here in the United States, it seems to me that it's more a marketing campaign than it is an actual technological layout. They're trying to get people excited about the prospect of what it will bring, but in terms of reality, like everyone else has just said, the reality is years in the future.
Yeah, I guess it's a different story when it comes to the China story, because China is developing the 5G and also the networks are being developed right now. But the question really is, Mr. Guy, as you mentioned earlier, whether the speed of development will catch up with the expectations of the consumers. That's the thing, isn't it, Mr. Guy?
Yeah, I do think that's the issue. And when we talk about this question, probably we will think about this issue in two ways. The first one is infrastructure. I do think the Chinese companies are doing a better job than its foreign competitors. For example, let's talk about Huawei. I do think this Chinese high-tech giant is doing a good job in making chips that will be used in base stations for 5G. But on the other side, again, when I talk about ecosystems, well, it takes a long time. Even though we have our own operating system employing Harmony, we don't have enough users that actually use the system. So it takes a long time to attract actual users to actually use the operating system and attract developers to develop enough apps running on the operating system.
Right. Of course, we're talking about two different things. One is the 5G availability of it, basically speaking to ordinary subscribers and users of telecom companies. And secondly, you're talking about a system in which China will mainly be the player of innovation. You create a system in which China does not necessarily need the import of all of the important operating system as the 4G or 3G has been using, which is provided by some of the foreign companies. Now, those are two very different things. We're still talking about the first thing. So, Mr. Antner, if others are not hurrying up, is China market itself, with the amount of users that you have already seen people's enthusiasm in this market, will be able to produce something, at least for the rest of the world to look at, if the rest of the world are not catching up?
Well, China certainly, as the most populous nation and launching in the top 50 markets, will create a significant market. We're seeing already the promise. For example, South Korea has already launched 5G. Wireless usage of 5G users is 5 times higher than that of 4G users, and people get used to the higher speeds that the South Korean systems are providing. When we come to equipment, for example, there will be chipsets coming next summer that will allow different frequency bands in 5G to be used. And that will be, for example, in the iPhone, which is a huge device here in the United States, but also in China. And they will be all 5G capable. So I think give it 6 months, give it a year, give it 2 years, and you will have the right devices, the right in enough people's hands that this will really work out. Chinese companies are also at the forefront of 5G devices. And OnePlus, for example, in the US is launching with T-Mobile when they're launching their nationwide 5G network with 200 million people coverage on December 6th.
So we see already the different baby steps at different areas and countries. Mr. McDuffie, now there are still geopolitical reasons that is preventing the 5G technology, which has been the core competition tool of Huawei, for example, from China, to be used elsewhere, particularly in the US market. So do you think there's going to be different systems when it comes to 5G as a result of geopolitics? Well, Europe, on the other hand, at this point is quite neutral, saying that they are not necessarily refusing any company or any company from any specific country.
Yes, I think the global marketplace will generate competing systems initially, for sure. There's going to be that competition to see which systems perform better, which systems are most trusted. That's part of the geopolitical issue is can you trust that there aren't, nefarious software embedded in the systems that allow, nations or companies to take advantage of others. So once those things get sorted out, I think eventually you'll either come down to one or two systems that dominate the marketplace, or you'll find a method of being able to operationalize these systems so that they cooperate with each other and won't really demand one to just take over the other. If the multiple systems can operate and communicate with each other, that they'll probably settle into their own niches.
Mr. McDuffie, I have to say, you're talking about a gigantic topic. Once all the disputes are settled down, then the cooperators will be able to figure out a way they can have access to each other and be able to work together. You're talking about a long time, my friend. But I want to come back to the topic, Mr. Antner. Mr. McDuffie, I know him. He's always an optimistic guy. But Mr. Antner, what about that? There are several issues here when it comes to whether one chip or one technology is being trusted. I guess it's neutral, which means that there could be a suspicion about Chinese entities, and also the Chinese consumers could also be suspicious of other producers. So from the United States particularly, and I guess in Europe they have the same concern as earlier cases indicated. So, Mr. Antner, what do you make of that? Whether the trust is the issue here when it comes to whether technologies will be used and improved, or the other way around, technology improvement will likely create more trust. In this case, 5G, Mr. Antner.
I think to a certain extent we're talking all about hardware here right now, but we're missing the bigger picture. That one of the building components of 5G is that network things that are being done right now in hardware are being virtualized, means they turn into software. So the base station equipment at the edge of the network will become dumb equipment, but then instead all of the software that runs the edge and the base stations will be in the core of the network. And that will be a massive change for how we build wireless networks and design it. This will open up the market for many more companies, and the security concern for the equipment that is now at the antenna will become a lot less. Now the security concerns around what controls the hardware will become a lot bigger. And so we'll see what happens over time here. And I don't think there's a lot of change going on.
According to all the factual reports, not suspicion, but rather factual reports based on evidence and the real facts, that Intel has been having some problems with backdoor and revealing and collecting private information coming from other countries. That has already become part of the international press coverage. While Huawei has been suspicious, quote unquote, by the American side without the latter side providing any evidence in the name of national security so far to the public. Now, what we know is only public information. For whatever we do not know about what the U.S. security circle has been talking about within themselves, that's not information available to us. So now, in the public domain, it is like that. So, Mr. Guy, help us to understand, how do you see this debate about hardware and in the process of moving up to software, as Mr. Antner earlier indicated? How do you see this process likely to be? Is it going to be smooth, or there's going to be a lot of zigzagging in the process?
Well, this is really a big issue in cybersecurity, because building up the trust is really hard in computing field. Actually, there is no evidence to prove that Huawei is creating backdoors in its hardware. That's according to the open source, and I think we need to have like a new technology to solve the problem, because technology is moving forward. There will be new problems in new technologies. For example, nowadays people talk about blockchain, because blockchain system can create trustful environment for computing.
Because everybody could have access to it at any time of the day, right?
Exactly, because everybody has a copy of a ledger,
Right.
which means we can record every activity or event happen in the system.
So you think technology, as it improves, it would be able to solve some of the trust issues that we see today?
Yes, I do think so, because we can, solve partial problems, even though we cannot solve the full problems, but still we can have a solution.
That sounds wonderful, but are you as optimistic as Mr. McDuffie? Because you're also talking about pretty long term, I have to say, to find the so-called technology solutions to the trust issue. Mr. McDuffie, you want to also talk to your Chinese friends about that?
Yeah, I think we have to be optimistic. I think one of the things that drives the optimism is the practicality of commercialism. In order for companies to maximize their profits, interoperability is key. And the trust issue with the marketplace is also key. So you not only have to have those kind of technological advances, you have to have standard practices, you have to have ways to punish bad actors, and we have to remember it's not just nation states spying on nation states. There are criminal elements that are global, that are in some respect much more dangerous to the everyday citizen than the spy versus spy stuff is, because the global criminal enterprise is trying to take money out of the everyday citizen's pocket directly. So there are all manner of threats out there, and you have to look for technological and policy and governance solutions across the board.
Mr. Antoner, obviously Mr. McDuffie is trying to remind the two of you that he's not just a pure optimist, he's a very pragmatic person. The common threat, quote unquote, in his words, would bring people, countries, companies together, and commercial interest, which is recognized globally, could also solve the problem. Do you think so? In what timeline?
Yes and no. So I'm always an optimist, and I always want people to work together, right? Reality shows us that's not always the case. I think there will be cooperation when it comes around combating criminal elements and the alike. It's just like when we're moving to software, this becomes even harder. Microsoft's Windows operating system, they just fixed a bug that's in there for 30 years that you could use to access the network. So software makes things certainly more complicated.
Let me wrap up today's discussion by asking a last question, but also a very important question, that is 5G communications is only, the 5G mobile phone is only a very small proportion of what 5G could do and what could be its potential. From all of yours perspective, where is it heading for? What can 5G really bring to us? Let's just say 5 years from now, when the technologies are becoming more mature, when the infrastructures have been somewhat well established. Mr. McDuffie, you want to go first?
Sure. So it's hard to predict 5, 6, 10 years out what's going to happen, but you have to think about 5G as part of a continuing evolution. There's going to be 6G, there's going to be 7G. I've even seen reports of people talking about what 8G looks like. These are all just platforms that are going to give new technical capabilities to masses of people. I think the real important intersection to look at beyond the platforms is what is artificial intelligence going to do with those platforms, what is big data's impact on those going to be, high performance computing. When you bring those three areas together and put them on top of a high performance platform like 5G, 6G ends up promising to be, there are unpredictable game changers that will come out of that that we have no idea of what they're going to be right now.
That is exactly why it's exciting, isn't it? Mr. Guy, your thought?
Well, I want to talk about two things. The first one is about individual daily life, because in the past 10 years, people have already familiar with using a single function app, but in the future 10 years, people will see a lot of apps with multiple functions, because in the past, apps were restricted by the network speed. The second thing that I want to mention is about industrial internet. So this is the real power of 5G in the future. Especially in China, we know China has a lot of factories, and in the future we will see a lot of smart manufacturing happen in future 10 years.
All right, and last but not least, Mr. Antner, what to expect?
I'm most excited about what's called edge computing, where basically the things that we can do right now on our devices is constrained by how much power the phone has. But when you have a really fast connection with no latency, basically no waiting time, you can put all the computing power on a data center near your base station. And suddenly you have supercomputer computing power in the palm of your hand. So things like picture recognition that takes 10 seconds, 20 seconds on a phone today, you can do in 1 second or a fraction of a second, because you're not constrained by how big the phone can be, how hot, how powerful the device can be.
Okay.
All of that can be moved to a data center, and the phone can change dramatically, because then all the computing will happen in the cloud, and you can have a very thin, long-lasting phone, because it doesn't need the computing on the device.
There's a lot of becauses over there. Obviously, one leads to another, and the excitement is ever coming. If we can handle some of the geopolitical issues well, probably the innovation will be coming even faster than we can expect. Thank you so much for the three of you for joining us and helping us to understand the potential, the real potential, as you speak, 5G for all of us. Thank you. Roger Antner, Ernest McDuffie, and Guy Keke.